For this morning's meditation, let us read from 2 Samuel chapter 4, verses 1 to 12. When Ishbosheth, Saul's son, heard that Abner had died at Hebron, his courage failed, and all Israel was dismayed. Now Saul's son had two men who were captains of raiding bands. The name of the one was Baanah, and the name of the other Rechab, sons of Rimmon, a man of Benjamin from Beeroth. For Beeroth also is counted part of Benjamin. The Beerothites fled to Gittaim and have been sojourners there to this day. Jonathan, the son of Saul, had a son who was crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. And his nurse took him up and fled, and as she fled in a haste, he fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. Now the sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite, Rechab and Baanah, set out, and about the heat of the day, they came to the house of Ishbosheth as he was taking his noonday rest. And they came into the midst of the house as if to get wheat, and they stabbed him in the stomach. And Rechab and Baanah, his brother, escaped. When they came into the house as he lay on his bed in his bedroom, they struck him and put him to death and beheaded him. They took his head and went by the way of Arabah all night, and brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron. And they said to the king, "Here is the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life. The Lord has avenged my lord, the king, this day on Saul and on his offspring." But David answered Rechab and Baanah, his brother, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, "As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life out of every adversity, when one told me, 'Behold, Saul is dead,' and thought he was bringing good news, I seized him and killed him at Ziklag, which was the reward I gave him for his news. How much more, when wicked men have killed a righteous man in his own house on his bed, shall I not now require his blood at your hand and destroy you from the earth?" And David commanded his young men, and they killed them and cut off their hands and feet and hanged them beside the pool at Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the tomb of Abner at Hebron. Abner was the right-hand man of Ishbosheth. He was the one who installed him as king of Israel in spite of knowing that David was the anointed king and the true successor to Saul. Ishbosheth was a weak man. He did not resist Abner's attempts to establish his false claim to the throne. He depended on Abner's military and political skill to sustain that claim. But once Abner died, he had nothing to rely on. He realized that his days were numbered. As with all who trust in men, both Ishbosheth and all Israel lost their courage after Abner's fall. Abner's defection to David and his death must have planted more seeds of opportunism in Israel. Many in Ishbosheth's army may have realized that a huge question mark lay over their future, since the very continuance of Ishbosheth as king was now in question. They must have begun to think actively of joining David, who was the Lord's anointed. But that this was earthly wisdom is clear from the actions of these two sons of Rechab. There is nothing wrong with realizing one's error and turning back. But earthly wisdom, which is selfish, ambitious, devilish, and full of strife and evil works, is driven solely by the desire of self-preservation. James 3:14 says, "But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice." Baanah and Rechab were leaders of raiding bands in Ishbosheth's army. They plotted to kill their master and present his head to David. It was a naked ploy for promotion, a plan to gain David's approval and a special reward in his kingdom. The former king Saul received the treachery of Ziphites against David with gladness, blessing them in the name of the Lord when they came to him at Gibeah saying, "Is not David hiding among us?" We read in 1 Corinthians 15:33, "Do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals." They imagined that David was another man of the same sort, that he would reward those who removed his rival and smoothed his path to the throne. But how different was David's thought? He had established his kingdom in Hebron. He was universally popular. He had the military power to fight against Ishbosheth and take the throne that rightfully belonged to him. He would not be a usurper, but one who claimed God's promise to him. Yet he was guided by the Spirit of God. He waited in patience for God to remove the house of Saul completely and put him on the throne of Israel with the full consent of the people. He would not grab the throne by force, nor would he make haste. There were no shortcuts for David. He understood what Psalmist said in Psalm 89, verse 14 to 16. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Steadfast love and faithfulness go before you. Blessed are the people who know the festal shout, who walk, O Lord, in the light of your face, who exult in your name all the day, and in your righteousness are exalted. Rechab and Baanah were the children of Benjamin, Saul's own tribe. After their act of treachery, they brazenly took God's holy name on their lips, saying, "The Lord has avenged my Lord, the king, this day on Saul and on his offspring." But God is not the mover of disloyalty and rebellion. He is a faithful and covenant-keeping God, and so are all those who know him. Proverbs 14:12 says, "There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death." They also describe their act as one of revenge on the son of Saul, David's enemy. Yet David never did think this way of Saul. He regarded Saul as having been misled by others to suspect David's loyalty to himself. The memorial song that David composed at the death of Saul and Jonathan proved Saul's firm place in David's heart as his master and Lord, with whom he longed to be reconciled. When David met these two assassins and heard what they had done, he rebuked them at once with fierce anger, making them an example by also cutting off their hands and feet. He reminded them of his punishment of the Amalekite who claimed to have killed Saul. David said, "How much more, when wicked men have killed a righteous man in his own house on his bed, shall I not now require his blood at your hand and destroy you from the earth?" Ishbosheth had done nothing to alienate his captains from him or to deserve such an end at their hands. David thus cut off their feet that took them on their deadly mission and their hands which had been raised against their master's life. The Lord reminds us that it is better to cut off an arm or a leg or even an eye rather than fall prey to evil through these organs. David's adherence to God's thought and his walk in God's ways marks him out again as a man after God's own heart. His one aim was to do what God had ordered for him. He had no personal agenda. Therefore, he was in no rush to sit on the throne. He did not need the throne to shepherd his people. Wherever he was in the wilderness fleeing from Saul's pursuit or in Ziklag seeking protection from the Philistines, he did what God had appointed for him. He fought for Israel against their enemies wherever he was and whatever his personal situation. Through David, God set an example and standard to all other kings. All future rulers in his lineage were evaluated by this standard, with a repeated statement, their hearts were or were not as perfect as that of their father David. Let us set our hearts on God. Let us humble ourselves under the mighty hand of God so that he may lift us up in due time. Let our hearts be perfect towards Him, so that His will is our sole joy and our one focus. Then we will never fail. God bless.